Good evening. With a quorum present and it being 5:15, I call the Francisco School Board meeting to order. Merrill Koenig is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. We'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda submitted.
Second.
Who got that second? Mr. Summer did. It was loud enough. Any discussion? Hearing none by roll call.
Mr. Hain?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. I don't see people comments on here.
We didn't put any out
We didn't
tonight.
put
We'll
on
move right to the
there.
session.
So we're going to jump right into our financial planning. I guess the board has had an opportunity to read everything over. And I'd like to just kind of open it up with the administration, kind of laying the groundwork for what their recommendation is. And then I would allow the board to begin discussion about the items. I'd like to keep the discussion to the board during that time period unless there's questions of the administration. And then we can kind of decipher through some of the information. We had a lot of information to review. So I'd like to make sure that we keep it organized and allow voices to be heard and allow you guys to present your information to us as well. All right, so with that, I'll turn over to Dr. Mary Hendricks-Harris.
So for work session tonight, we've prepared a few documents. When we left the last meeting, we had a few directives from the board. One was to launch a staff survey regarding budget and reductions, and we have provided the board a summary of the survey, specifically the themes from the responses. And so you can see those outlined in regards to the suggestions and the number of comments. We did have about 25%, a little bit more since Monday, of our staff respond to that survey. So if you were to look at what those suggestions were, they would be administration, content leaders, curriculum, extracurriculars, pay to play, 4-day work week, Mastery Connect and Galileo, principals, APs, and interns, reduction of professional development, release days, and transportation. Those would be in alphabetical order. You can see the number of times that those were mentioned in the survey. Also have provided a list of the cuts that we discussed last time that we would consider non-staffing cuts. So in a minute, Lisa will present the big ideas about a status quo staffing plan. What we've outlined here would be non-staffing cuts. Many of those were discussed at the last board meeting, so I won't go through those again. The one thing that has been omitted based on what I believe was board consensus last time was elementary and middle school extracurriculars is not on that list any longer. So if you look at the total of those, you can see it adds up to a little over $1.3 million in cuts. We proposed to the board last time things that are required, things that we have put on hold that we feel like we need to continue or to reinstate, and that would be technology and tutoring. While it doesn't add up to the exact amount of 1.3, we could make some adjustments to those additional needs to have that be essentially a wash. So that would allow us to make the cuts, those non-staffing cuts, to align with the things that we need. So in the meeting part of the financial planning, you'll see 3 options that the board discussed last meeting in regards to financial planning. The first option is essentially a budget where we would bring these needs in addition to a budget that has a slight deficit planned. We know that we always have a positive variance, but we would have a budget that just indicated our needs and would likely spend some of our reserves. The second option outlines a direction for administration to plan a budget with a slight deficit. That means we would cut those things at the top of the page, add what we need, move forward with a planned budget with a slight deficit, but if we figured in the historical positive variance, it would likely be a balanced budget in the end. And the third option that the board's considering tonight is one that we would bring to you a plan for a balanced budget, likely with the historical positive variance would add some to reserves. So if you look at that chart and the additional staffing needs, that would get us to option 2. If the board opts tonight for option 3, there would need to be additional cuts. We've outlined some things that have been discussed. At this point, it's no longer status quo staffing. So if we opt for option 3, unless we talk about other cuts to get us there, we would see furlough days that had been discussed, additional support staff, administrative cuts, certified cuts, and then additional security cuts to help us get to that number. And then we just outlined some next steps. And I know that cutting transportation is something that came up in the survey, so we included that amount in there for you. So I think the last thing that we would share as part of the work session would be the staffing plan. And again, tonight we are not bringing forth the full staffing plan with specific positions. That was scheduled to come next meeting, but some big ideas about how we would go about building a status quo staffing plan.
So at the direction of the board, we worked to put together a status quo staffing plan that would bring to you adding some of our needs, looking in areas where we could reduce some staffing. So basically reallocating staffing to meet the needs that we had within our district, and also contributing to a balanced budget as far as the salary changes that would be affected within the plan. So in our 3 big categories, we have status quo staffing for our administrators. We do have status quo staffing with our certified staff, so we would reallocate some staffing between our buildings due to enrollment, so moving some folks from one building to another within their current positions to address the needs of enrollment, and then restructuring some programs that would result in reallocating 9 positions so that we could add or reallocate 2-3 elementary teaching positions due to class sizes and enrollment, 2 of those ELL positions to meet federal program requirements, and 4 positions that would allow us to address the social emotional needs as we continue to look at ways to address those needs. And what exactly that looks like, the title of those positions will be determined by those stakeholders, but that allows us to have a placeholder there. And so that would mean a 0 change in FTE and a 0 change in salary for our certified staff. As we look to non-certified staffing, we would suggest to eliminate an anticipated vacant part-time administrative assistant position. We will reallocate an administrative assistant position from our district budget to the vacation station budget as the work that position does aligns with vacation station. And we have 4 one-year-only positions. When we hired those employees, we said they were one-year-only positions for this school year. And so we will reallocate all of that staffing to address, again, the social emotional needs that we have within the district. And that would allow for us to have 2 support positions for that work. In addition, just note for you, this is the year that when we do create work calendars, the number of weekend days is a little bit higher than the number of weekdays in a typical year. And so we will see on the 260-day work calendar, it will only have 259 work days. And on our custodial calendar, maintenance calendar, it's usually a 261-day calendar. They will see 260 days. So we'll see some slight salary savings there. That is not part of a reduction or part of the staffing plan. It's just something that happens but wanted you to know that that would be a part of what you'll see coming with work calendars in the future. And so those changes result in a slight change in FTE for our non-certified staff at this point, and a small savings in salary, about $20,000. So again, contributing to that balanced budget and not impacting folks that are within those positions.
Do you want me to do, so if we, sure.
Well, I was going to have them present
So the last thing that we really have falls into the fiscal responsibility planning session that we've posted some documents for that portion of the meeting with some proposed motions. You can see those are along the lines of what I outlined earlier in the meeting. I think part of the questions that we got today had to deal with what's the board recommended motion. I mean, what's the board? That's what we're getting at. What's the board's recommended? What is administration's recommended motion? And after much discussion and debate, our recommendation is option 2, plan the 17-18 budget with the current projected deficit. Use the typical positive variance between estimated and actual revenue and expense to end the fiscal year with a balanced budget. And that, again, that would be 17-18. The other thing, and I know that you all are aware, but I do feel like in each one of these discussions, I just want to remind everyone that we have made significant cuts the last 2 years, and those things are affecting our classroom and our daily operations. We have cut tutoring, technology, textbooks, library materials, staffing in areas of interventions, classroom teachers, teachers' assistants, counselors, special education staff. This would not be our first cut to extracurricular activities. We have cut funding for training for parents, random drug testing, online courses, new teacher supports. We've had a salary freeze across the district, and we even have administrators that took a slight salary cut. So the cuts that we're talking about are in addition to, not our first round of cuts. And part of what we were looking to do with Proposition Howell was to reinstate some of those things that are necessary to move our district forward. So with that, we're done.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Is it on? Just a clarifying question. In your current non-certified staffing and the allocation of the 2 ED program, last meeting we talked about 8, I believe, and so this is 10. Thank you, 10. So is it 2 now in this current plan, or am I not understanding?
So to get to a status quo staffing plan and reallocating staff, we were able to get 4 of those positions on the certified side. So you'll see those 4 placeholders there, and then 2 positions on the non-certified. So we can get to 6 positions of the 10, staying status quo and reallocating staff that you see there.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
After we approved the staffing plan last year, do you remember approximately how many additional certified staff we had to add? That's question A.
I believe the contingency staffing that was asked for was around 3 to 4 positions, and that's where we landed.
And the current plan that you're proposing bringing in 2 weeks will have how many contingent positions?
We will ask for about 3 contingent positions.
Because originally last year's had 0 in it, is that correct?
I believe so, yes. And then we came back to the board and asked for some additional contingency because of needs that were unforeseen.
So the plan in 2 weeks will have some contingent positions.
That's how we would anticipate bringing it to you, unless you tell us otherwise. Give us some direction to not include contingency.
All right. And that was the case maybe 10 years ago. We had that many, yeah.
I think we had 10 in the budget, but we just didn't have them in our staffing plan. No?
I don't think it was 10 last year. I don't think we had any contingency in support staff in the plan, and we had a very small number in certified last year. We did come back and add some non-certified. Mm-hmm. And in the past, I think you're right, it's been 6 under support staff and 4 or 5 on certified, or even higher in the past.
I think one of the changes that Lisa and I have been talking about is moving forward. We know that we have had contingency when certain enrollment numbers, certain class sizes have gotten high in the past. And moving forward, we might not be able to address that with staff. So we might have a new normal number in some of those classrooms. And when we get the calls that our fifth grade classroom is up to X amount of number, we might not be able to add that staff. And so the contingency numbers might not be the numbers that they have been in the past because we're going to have to approach staffing a little differently.
Okay. And then to move on to question C, expected enrollment for the 2017-2018 year as opposed to now? Lose another 100 students district-wide, about even? I don't think I've seen that projection recently.
We're definitely seeing some increased enrollment in specific buildings. Kevin's going to pull up the actual numbers for you.
The 2016-17 projections were 17,116, and the 2017-18 projections are 17,081. So we're losing at a smaller rate than we have previously, but a slightly smaller number of students.
Is that due to some new building, new construction?
We do factor in new construction, and we use, the hardest grades for us to predict, of course, is our kindergarten. We see the greatest amount of variability there, and we have less precise data on that.
So part of the reason I think that we asked for the staff survey was to help us in coming up with, where do we go with this staffing plan. And because of timelines, we added the extra meeting. So is everybody okay if we talk about that survey for a bit? Kind of move to that, because I actually reviewed the survey, and at the time it was 573. It's increased now, so I haven't seen the last few. And there were a lot of themes, and I think one of the biggest themes that I saw was administration. I think the way that it's broken down presented to us tonight as two different categories, principals and administration, it seems, in a building, and then administration, there we go. The admin pay, and principals, APs, and interns. If you add those two numbers, that's number one by a whole lot. And so I'm concerned that I don't know if we're really addressing that with, these plans. Some of the questions and some of the answers that we got just before the meeting will be very helpful. But the other things, transportation. My one concern that I have is if we go status quo, what are the things that are deferred? Because we've already made all these cuts. What things are deferred that are going to come hit us if we don't get additional revenue 2-3 years from now, let's just say? What items might be popping up that are going to, really impact what's going on? So those are some questions. I guess we'll start with that.
Glad you clarified those were questions. So a couple things. One about administrators. It absolutely is a theme. As I told one of the reporters today, we expect that to be a theme when you are posing budget reduction. Administrators are always something that's going to be mentioned, whether you're talking about a business, they always talk about the higher ups in the company, or in a school district, administration is going to be one of those things. So just some facts that we would offer would be that since 2000, we have cut administration by 25%. That is a large reduction compared to other groups. Our administrator to student ratio is above the state average and compares either the same or is higher than our surrounding districts. So the thought out there that we're a top-heavy district, if you look at data, isn't supported by data. We have reduced building administrators from 71-65 over to 65 over the past 8 years. I don't know that I would have. I haven't had a chance to look at all the cabinets, but the cabinet, so the director level and chief level of surrounding districts. And I know you specifically asked me about Wentzville yesterday. Wentzville's is much larger, is larger than ours. And so they have more chiefs and more directors than we do in Francis Howell. So one of the reasons we didn't bring administrator cuts tonight is because we were asked for status quo. So the thought of we're not going to cut teachers, we're not cutting support staff, status quo to us, as we noted in our response to you, was that meant status quo. So we did not bring administrator as part of our cuts. And the second part of the question had to do with transportation, other issues down the road. So that would kind of fall in two categories in my mind. One would be capital, which Kevin can address, and the other would be, this is our first year of salary freezes. We have not gone into negotiations yet for next school year. But if you are thinking long-term over the next 5 years, you cannot continue to not pay your employees. So we cannot be in a place where we are at the bottom of the barrel and people are choosing to go everywhere but Francis Howell. I had a superintendent tell me this week, I always have lost teachers to your district, and I don't anticipate that's going to be the case anymore. And so we don't want to be in that position for any length of time. So that would be an additional expense that we are going to have to plan it for.
I do think that there will be some issues around deferred maintenance. One of the themes that also came up through the building survey, and we also hear this quite a bit, is variability in temperatures within the building. One way to improve that would be to install modern control systems, which give you greater control over particular areas. It takes money to do that. Not all of our buildings were constructed with automated control systems. And so we would like to move in that direction. We would like to become more energy efficient. I was talking with Mr. Bettler, and he shared with me, we have one of our buildings where when we need to make an adjustment like that, a maintenance guy has to get up on the roof and actually deal with the air handlers up on the roof. It's not controlling, sitting down at a computer and controlling the temperature in a particular room. So there are things that require money to be spent in order to make the program more efficient. We certainly don't have the resources to do those now, and I would anticipate that we'll continue to hear complaints in some buildings about temperature because it becomes very difficult to regulate. And I do think it's important, since I have a moment just to remind people, and Chad can share his own experience, but our buildings are designed to run under a particular load. So if there are fewer kids in the building on a particular day, the temperature is going to be more variable because we expect to have 800 kids in that building. If there's a bunch of kids on a field trip, it's going to be a little bit different that day. And it's hard to heat and cool a large building quickly. So you might come in and it feels cold, or it might feel hot. There are a lot of things that you can't think about our school buildings the way you do about your home or your car, where you push the button and in a couple minutes later the temperature's evened out. We have hundreds of thousands, our high schools are 300,000 square feet. So are there going to be variabilities within a facility that size? Yes. Do we try to manage those as best we can? Yes. Do we need to install some modern control systems in order to be able to do a better job of that? Yeah, that takes money for us to do that. So I think that's an example of something that we don't have resources for now, and certainly wouldn't in the future, and we'll have to deal with some continuing complaints about temperatures.
Those are the only two things that have been cut that we don't need back.
Are you talking about technology and tutoring?
Well, the long list of cuts that you mentioned at the very beginning. All of those items are gone. They're gone forever. And how does that impact us?
And we need those back, and that's why we went out for Proposition Howell. And those are things that, at this point, what we feel for next year, we need to reinstate. It comes down to technology and tutoring and the adjustments that Lisa was able to make to staffing and still keep it status quo.
So let me help. So I think one of the things that we cut is the number of positions that we've cut across the district. So right now our class sizes are higher than what we want. Our support structure for our struggling students, our gifted students, and our mainstream students are less than what we want. So to me, in my head, those are things that need to come back, that we are impacting our students, even though we've tried to keep the cuts away from the kids by reducing our staff as significantly as we've done in the last couple of years. That is a concern I have. So I think that's one example of something that's gone that is a need to bring back. That is, we're going to feel that as it goes down the road. I think the two items that you've brought forward thus far, the technology and the tutoring, are the immediate return needs. That'd be accurate.
And if I can follow up on the technology, the $1.5 million there, those are ongoing annual as opposed to one-time items for the 17-18 year?
That is correct. Mr. Wilson has developed a plan to get us back on track with technology after having our technology put on hold for years, and it would, give or take, depending on what year you're looking at. Some years it's slightly more, sometimes years it's slightly less. But to get us back on track, you're looking at $1.5 million annually.
Okay. And if I could follow up then on something you said earlier, the 6 administrators that have been cut since 2000, just to kind of refresh my memory, 3 of those were the dean of students positions that were, we went from 2 to 1 at the high schools. Is that correct?
It seems as if that would be correct, yes.
It's
And that was
a little
building
fuzzy
level.
up here, but I'm trying to. Yeah.
Those are building level,
Those are teachers that went back into the classroom. You're right. Yeah,
who were doing administrative work.
correct.
Okay, so back to the survey.
Sure.
And I'm just going to kind of go over the notes of the major themes that I noted before reviewing board docs. And these are not in a particular order. Transportation, administration, a 4-day week, extracurriculars, freshman sports, release time for professional development, collaboration time, substitute teachers for release, collaboration, and professional development, no new curriculum. I got a kind of overwhelming sense that our teachers are exhausted right now, that we have given them so many new curriculums and new things that they're doing. It's harder and harder and harder, and we're asking them to be out of the classroom more and more and more. So that was one of the biggest themes that I noticed. Hard boundary lines. We've got certain subdivisions, and it's throwing off numbers in certain schools because of that. So maybe looking at firm boundary lines, maybe that would assist in lowering some costs. Employee children attendance was something that was brought up. I would imagine there's probably not a significant cost to that, but to the employees that are bringing their children, I think it's priceless. So I would hate to see us lose that type of a benefit for our staff, but I think we should maybe at least give people an idea, what does that actually cost us? Something that I've been talking about for a while too with the technology, Study Island, some of these were up there, but Study Island, Learning.com, Galileo, Mastery Connect, Ames Web, Schoology, Brain Pop, and Career Cruising were mentioned over and over and over and over. The other technology piece that was mentioned quite frequently was going from Microsoft to Google. That's, would save probably a lot of money just in programs. Literacy coaches, content leaders, recess, library, and cafeteria paras. I will say that I was educated today that that's probably the high school teacher saying get rid of those paras. So full disclosure, I understand that's probably not the elementary teacher saying, hey, yeah, we want to give those up. Closing for the holidays, and that means, across the district, even administration. The buildings are closed, Christmas to New Year's. Transition days, we talked about that couple weeks ago. If we don't have transportation, I don't know that we really need the transition day. So what costs do we have there? Copier accountability, early retirement, heating and cooling, ACT, Chinese classes. Specific administrative position cuts, grandfathered coaches, out-of-district students, and then there were quite a few other things that were mentioned that were all acronyms. LEAP was one of them. The fun ideas for revenue generation of bake sales and telethons was entertaining as I read through all of them. Couple of the things that I want to point out. Yep, you got.
No, I moved it up.
Oh, okay, sorry. Number 300 had a really fantastic idea. We pay money for PBIS, Leader in Me, CITW, Sanctuary, and these are all great programs. I bet we could find 10 people in the district who could develop a comprehensive building culture involving all of these ideas, simplified, tailored to our students and teachers, save staff from being inundated with new initiatives that are often overwhelming and dizzying. I thought that was an interesting, because I know we're seeing every time on these over 7,500 purchases, we're seeing all of these systems. So can we consolidate? Can we use the talent that we have here to work on those sorts of things? Let's see. There was only one staff person that put her name. I'm not going to share that here, but I just want to say thank you. And I think that I can tell you that the idea of moving from textbooks to digital, the staff person that shared their name has a ton of information, and we should look into the knowledge that she's got. She was number 437.
I just want to say those numbers change when people add to the list, so your number won't be the number if people go out there and look it up today.
Oh, well, I don't know who has access to the survey anyways, so that's more for you guys to be able to look up and see. One thing that I did find concerning was we actually had a staff member state that you could hire 3 teachers what you pay me. I live in the district and voted no twice. I will never vote for a proposition as long as you continue to waste money. So, and then he goes on to say you cut teachers, but you don't cut administrators. So if we've truly cut 25% of our administration in the last 15 years, we need to see that spelled out, because that's not the impression our staff has. So that's kind of my, what I went through, my notes of what I saw. I didn't tally the numbers, of course, but I think that we have got to talk about these things in our plans, or why did we bother asking? I think some of it has been addressed, but curriculum, content leaders, I don't know, how much of that is staff, how much of it is programs. Where do we go with that? How do we move forward responsibly now that we've got 20% of our staff telling us certain things?
I don't know if that's a question or if you would like me to address some of those things.
Yes. But let's not, let's understand what our role is here at the board is not to go in and trying to manage the school district, but take a look at some big ideas for the future, but not to make recommendations from this seat. But I certainly think in listening and reading some of the information myself and being around as long as I have, that there is some very good points being made in some of the information that's coming from our staff. I've thought of some of these things too, and when I go back and I look at things that we've added along the year, like Mandarin Chinese, okay, why is that not on the cut list? We just added that last year. It's not a program we've had, and all of a sudden, that's being kind of just put off to the side. I think about paraprofessionals at the elementary level, and I understand that it creates an opportunity at at planning time for teachers at the elementary level. But that to me, that's a luxury item. That's an item if you have lots of money and you can afford to continue to have that. We spend $500,000 a year on that line item. I think it's a good thing to have teachers not having to go on the playground every fourth day. But I also value $500,000 a year, especially when we take a look at some of the cuts that we're making to add some people. I heard something else, and I don't recall. Oh, yeah, deans of students. I mean, at the high school level, we didn't have deans. When I first got on the board, I don't think we had them for 4 or 5 years, and all of a sudden they became important, and it allowed principals to get away from having to do disciplinary work, and allowed the deans of students to share that responsibility or take it over in some instances. So, when I look back and think of, and certainly there's more, but when I think about some of the things that we have in our program, and I look at our current situation and looking down the road, if we're going to, right now, I mean, we can make these cuts, get status quo, but I guarantee we're going to be sitting at this table next year having the same conversation until we right-size our school district appropriately. Now, we can't do it in 2 to 3 weeks, but I think it's something that we need to strongly look at and say, okay, if these are the revenues that we've been afforded, then we need to make sure that we work within the boundaries that the taxpayers has given us and make good decisions based on that. Because what I feel right now is we're making a decision for this year. It gets us through this year, and then we sit back here next year, some of us. And I don't want to be in that situation long term, because that's where we've been the last couple of years. And so, programmatically, when you think about all the programs that we have across the school district, as I said today on KMOX, I think they're all important. And I just don't think people understand when they go to the ballot box how important they are. And realistically, when you take a look at some of the things that we offer, they're good, but we're also offering things that can we really afford this? And I looked at the list. I read every survey, and a lot of the things that I'm seeing in the survey is some of the things I'm thinking. Now, long term, what does that look like? I don't know, but I just don't know. Looking at the stuff that I've looked at and the budget that we've looked at and the direction going forward, that we can sustain our program at the current level, and that's what I'm concerned about. I don't think we can. I'm only one board member, but I feel strongly about voicing this opinion until we wrap ourselves around this budget and truly identify sustainability. I don't think we've done our job at this level, and I'm concerned about that. And I don't want to make a bad decision, and I don't want to put off a good decision as well. And that's what I'm concerned about.
I feel like it was rapid fire suggestions, so why don't we let you guys keep talking, and then we might address some of the bigger ideas.
I too talked to quite a few teachers and different things, and overwhelmingly it came up the recess pairs and that, although the teachers didn't like the idea of having to do it, but they understand a luxury is a luxury. But as I stated the last time, thinking outside the box, if there's any pairs out there, recess pairs, I'm sorry, it's just, this is discussion. That sometimes we need to entertain the PTOs in that, because they're always donating to the school and they're looking for causes and different things like that. We may have just moved over that threshold where parents are willing and more able, like, this is going to give us our pair for the year. But then I was talking to this one teacher, and she said, that's a good thought, and the PTOs could probably raise enough money for one recess para and pay them, and how that goes. And I know they've done it for different things. And she said, the only problem with that is we have to, and I've never heard this, or I've heard it before, but I didn't know if it was true, that our buildings have to be equal. So if my PTO pays for a para at recess, but X school does not have that luxury, can we still do that? Or would that be thinking outside the box, being able to accommodate one particular school? That's a question. The other theme that came over, and there were several teachers that, you know, we really need that you know, the help in the classroom, but we also need the struggling students. We need this. But why is it that we could not get enough parental support? And so I addressed that teacher, and I had her call over to Riverview, the presenter from MSBA at Riverview, and how they engaged that community to come in to pick up the slack where the money was not available to do that, and the success that they're having. And that's where we as board members, that we have to think outside the box too. But this was a way that I sent someone somewhere who's investigating to see if she can incorporate some of those things. So maybe it's, you know, we take a little tour to a couple of the districts that can't pass a tax levy and has cut busing, has cut all this, to see how they actually function day to day, how the parental group functions with the school, and how things actually happen. That would be very interesting to us, and that we can do it, and we can think outside the box, and our parents would be willing, because that's their students, and that's the number one goal they have, is to educate their students. So that's kind of what I had to say for right now.
You know, that was one of the other thoughts I had was, you know, that we, at the high school we utilize early release time at the high school and middle school, but we don't do it at the elementary level, and that's a way that you could still get that plan time in and allow, you know, these teachers to get their PLC time as well, if you had early release time, because that's what we do in the high school and middle school. So I know that everything's an adjustment, but we're taking a look at some real long-term plans here that, you know, that we might need to adjust. I mean, I'm just throwing out some ideas, and, you know, just looking at the survey, because, you know, bottom line is, you know, we didn't have Mandarin Chinese last year. All of a sudden we got it. We didn't even think that as a cut. You know, some of the other things that we added last year, we're not even considering it. You know, I believe that the taxpayers have spoken for a while. I don't think that anybody on this board wants to go back. And so until we address some issues, you know, long term, because to me this looks more of a short-term fix and not a long-term fix. And I know that there's other opportunities to go out, but I'm pretty much sold right now when you get 80% of the people voting and they voted against it. That tells me something. It says, hey, you know, we don't have a majority of the community on board. You know, whether it be a nickel, whether it be 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, we just don't have the community support right now. So, you know, the other thing too is, you know, we haven't, the community really hasn't felt some of the cuts. You know, if they, you know, if you had to take your son or daughter to school, that would be something that, you know, you could share in that cost. I mean, we spend a lot of money on transportation, and we kind of waive that, you know, and I certainly don't want to, you know, endanger any students, but, you know, as I said before, we had a bus strike, and parents found ways to get their kids to school, and, you know, that's a large line item that, you know, to me, it's not being utilized, and maybe it's more planning's required, and that's fine, but, you know, I think that that's something we need to look at since it's one of our largest line items. I don't know how to address it, but I think it's important enough to have a discussion. Whether or not it's part of our staffing plan or not makes no difference, but it does make a difference in your bottom line and what you keep and what you get rid of. So, you know, it allows you to have some flexibility. So I mean, that's, as Michelle stated, some of the same things that I saw in that survey is some of the things I've been thinking about as well as a board member. So I want to make sure that collectively this is a decision the entire board makes, and it's not going to be a decision that one makes. But you know, it certainly is something to think about. It's not part of our staffing plan, transportation, but it is real dollars that's available to us, and I know it's kind of pushed in there as to study it and look at walk zones, and I understand there might be a result there, but I would encourage you to continue to look at that. I know that Wentzville does things a little differently. They pick up all their kids at one time. They pick up high school, middle school, and elementary. And they stagger their start times so they all get to school at a certain start time. And, you know, that's just another thing that maybe we can look at, talk to our bus company and see if that's an option that we can look at here. I don't know what our routes look like, and I don't pretend to know what they look like, but, you know, just looking at, that was part of it. That's one of the things I saw in the survey as well. So just throwing that out there. Ms. Cope's next.
Can I ask another clarification question? When talking about the walk zones, how does that coincide with the state law regarding tax initiatives around transportation, cutting it, reinstating it, voting, some of the conversations we've had in the past? Could you explain that to me?
Yes, so we have consulted with council, and they have told us that if we cut some, which would be the case in our walk zones, students less than 1 mile, it would not affect the need to go out for a vote to get it reinstated, as long as we weren't cutting all.
Thank you. I also had been just talking with some other districts, and I went rural, pretty much outstate, and asked how their busing tiers worked, and I know how some people don't like it or whatever, but it's the same as where they staggered their start times, but one bus picks up high school, middle school, and grade school, and they sit on the bus accordingly, and they drop off grade school, middle school, high school. And they said it significantly cut their transportation budget, almost in half, by doing that. And I know just from people way out in New Bell didn't like that idea with the middle school and high school way back when, because I remember getting yelled at because we were picking double.
I think we could talk, depending on the board's direction this evening, about how much of a transportation cut the board would like to see. And so are we looking for some efficiencies, like combination of some route and not provide the level of transportation that we've provided in the past? So walk zones, plus maybe there are some other efficiencies that we've been talking about. I believe we currently offer seats to all of our high school students, regardless of how frequently they ride the bus, and maybe that would not be a service we could provide any longer. And so there might be some things that we could do along those lines. I know the board has talked about that full cut of 3.5 or less, but I think when you start talking about putting kindergartners on the same bus as high school students, we become worried about safety and supervision and things along those lines. And so it's not that it's an impossibility, but it would be a concern that we would have moving forward.
I know, I got the privilege of riding a bus, which picked them all up. And they put the high school students in charge of a buddy. So they do buddy, and they read on the bus. Of course, now this is rural, so they're on that bus 45 minutes. And it has been more of a positive than a negative. We can make it a negative by saying, I would be concerned about this. But until we think outside the box and maybe try a trial run somewhere and see how that would do, because middle school and high school students love to be important. And that helped their bus frequency of problems on the bus and everything, because everybody has a duty and a job on the bus. And I know it sounds crazy and sounds a little out of sorts, but it is doable, and it's been done. And I sat on the bus, and there is the bus driver, and they do have someone on that bus. Of course, there is cameras on the bus also. But I looked at their incidences on the bus, and it's not any more than we have. And in fact, the kids like their buddies who sit and read to them and different things like that. And they, on the way home, they do homework. Now that it's getting dark, they can't do that, so they sing and they do other things. It was kind of a fun little ride I had.
So, transportation. This is a work session, so I don't know exactly, what we do if we give direction, but do we, I'm all for looking at ways to reduce, not get rid of completely, not get rid of everybody at a mile or less, because frankly, I don't know that we would ever get that back if we had to get a 2/3 vote. So walk zones, like you're talking, what direction do we need to provide? Do we need a vote? Do we need, what do we do with that? Like,
We don't need a vote to give the administration direction. You will need a vote for approval of whatever they bring back. We can give them some, it sounds to me that there's consensus on the board to take a look at transportation, some alternative ways to provide it, and efficiencies that you can bring back to us. But let's keep in mind we're approving a staffing plan tonight. As I said, that's separate from anything out there that we're taking a look at. But and I think that Ms. Walker brings up a good point. There's a lot of things within that survey that we probably need to address, or at least take a look at. Sometimes we just want to we take a survey for a reason. We certainly do not think that it's the job of the employees to make decisions for us, but I believe that they're close enough to the situation and their utilization of programs and experiences that they would have some insight as to what's useful and what's not. What can we do without possibly, what is something that we can take a look at long term. I think everything's on the table, and I think going forward, this staffing plan probably needs to be approved tonight, but I think we need to continue to dive into efficiencies in the school district. As I said, I think we'll be sitting here next year having the same discussion. I just don't want to do that. Ms. Cope.
So with regards to the staffing plan and the conversations we've had recently, as you mentioned in the survey, it sounds like our teachers, our administrators, all of our staff, certified and uncertified, are exhausted. And we've made numerous cuts over the last couple years. And you choose education as a profession because you have a passion. You don't choose it because you want to be a millionaire. Nope. They don't equate, right? So these people that have a passion are having to rely on that passion to get them through their regular day now. And I appreciate that very much. So myself as a board member, I don't want to see any additional staffing cuts. I'm pretty firm on it because I think we're as tight as we can get. Not that we can't look for efficiencies, but everything we do to continue to cut now, just as I've said before, is we're cutting into the bone. So I would be supportive of adding in the technology. We're in a world that gets smaller every day, and technology is changing faster than we can adapt. So the longer we keep that off our budget, the more challenging it'll be to catch up. I also believe in supporting the tutoring. We have struggling students, and I know, Nicole, you know that when we lose a student in elementary school or middle school because they can't function in math as well as they should be, we have lost them. And getting them back is just so much more difficult. We need to keep them on track right away. So with all of that said, I personally am comfortable with the recommended kind of go forward plan, specifically with staffing status quo, adding in the technology and tutoring, but I do believe transportation is our next thing to look at. And I do believe we need to make some cuts there. So if we keep staffing as status quo and we continue to say that we're going to we're going to affect the students as little as possible, that's in the academic area. When we talk about bringing parents in more as volunteers, that's an opportunity. But our next largest item is transportation. So looking at the walk zones, trying to see how much that can be, looking at multiple schools together, whether that's elementary and middle, or middle and high school. I think that varies across our district, right? Francis Howell High School sits out by itself. Daniel Boone sits by itself, where we have other elementary and middle schools, or middle school and high school in the same parking lot. So just as the walk zones kind of vary across the district, I think a joint plan may also vary. Of course, that depends on start times, and I don't know how that all fits together. But I think we need a thorough look at our transportation and where we can be today with some cuts going forward. So that's where I stand.
So, you know, in looking at transportation, you know, since we do not have our transportation expert here at the district anymore, do we have adequate folks to do a study? Or is that something that, I see Mr. Jeremy over there looking at me, or is that something that we'd want to, you know, see if we can't get a consultant in and see, you know, if there's something that we can take a look? I don't know.
Why don't you let us do this? I don't know if you want to go. I have a thought.
I think we have tremendous resources available to us through our contractor, and once we tell them what kind of scenarios we want to look at, we can work with them to model that. We certainly should be able to rely on them to help us do that work.
You know, I think the other thing too is the responsibility of parents, and you know, parents want transportation, but some of them don't use it, and you know, we have to make sure that if you're signed up for transportation, you're going to use it, because you can look at them buses in high school leaving the parking lot, and there's more kids walking over to get in a car and piled in by 3 or 4 people. Now, they want the luxury of having that transportation available to them when they need it, but they're not using it. And I don't know how many times I've been to the high school when the high school kids are letting out and them buses are half full. I know some kids are staying after school, and some kids are getting in cars and going home. So, and that's part of it. So, you know, I don't even know if we can look at this, but I just, you know, it's just one of the things that someone mentioned the other day. It might have been you, Michelle. Can you offer transportation to school, and then they pick their kids up?
It is possible.
So,
We're double checking, but we believe it's possible.
okay, and we wouldn't lose anything there since we're transporting them to school.
We would lose some reimbursement because we would only be able to claim half of the miles.
But our cost would be half.
But our cost would be half, or yes, ish. And I do want to say too that just because it's come up so much and it's a frequent topic of conversation, when we're doing our routing, we know who's signed up for transportation, but we always overfill the buses, if you will, because we know not everybody's going to ride. So I don't want anybody to think that we plan the buses as if everybody who signed up is going to ride. We never plan the bus routes that way. We always put more kids route-wise or roster-wise on the bus than we know are actually going to ride. We have experience over years to figure out who's going to do that, but I don't think people, you know, I wanted to say it out loud so that the board could hear it and so the public could hear it. We don't, we anticipate that there's going to be some non-riders who have signed up for that. And on the days when everybody rides, it's a little bit crowded on some of the buses.
Can everybody weigh in on what we're talking about, just those that we haven't heard from on the board. I'd like to know where they're at, just because I don't want to give you guys direction. You go and you get all the talented people and you work with first student, you bring it all back, only to find out that we're not all on the same page.
So before everybody weighs in, a couple things just that would be helpful for us. Our plan is that, especially if the board is going to ask us to move forward with status quo staffing, we would, at our next meeting, bring you back very specific details about what amount of staff would be in which building. That is our typical process. And then in January, you would vote on that. So actually, it would be another work session with a line by line. This is what status quo staffing would look like exactly. One of the things we have as part of the business meeting for tonight is more specific direction for us on budget planning. So are we looking at using our positive variance to balance the budget, using our positive variance to add to reserves, or planning on a deficit budget? You don't have to do that tonight. What I'm hearing is maybe we plan for status quo budget and begin to look at some of these efficiencies and then plan the budget. That is another option. Such as transportation. We want you to do transportation study. So those might be some things to weigh in on staffing, and then where are we with budget planning?
I have a clarifying question on the other points of discussion on here. The cut 3.5 miles or less of transportation, $4 million. Is that last year? It was a little bit different than that, I think.
We spend a little over $10 million on our regular routes, and then we have some additional transportation expenses related to summer school and some of the non-route type transportation. So all told together, about $12 million. But this certainly is a swag number. We haven't, if we're going to move in the direction of only transporting kids 3.5 miles, we actually have to go through the process of, because it's not as the crow flies, it's the route that's actually traveled on the street. So we have to go student by student and figure out who actually meets that criteria. So I would say, yeah, that number is probably still a little bit in flux. Because we don't know how many kids appear to live closer, but because of the route that has to be taken, meet the qualification for 3.5 miles.
Okay.
So, Mr. Supple, give me your ballpark on what we spend on transportation just on activities. So we're taking kids to sporting events and bringing them home. Where's our ballpark?
We spend about $110,000 at each high school, so that'll be the bulk of it. So about $330,000 a year on transportation to and or from competitions, depending upon. Typically, we transport to, and then the parents pick up. But the budget's about $110,000 per high school. There's some miscellaneous transportation that takes place at other levels, but the bulk of it's there at the high schools.
So, say that again. So we transport to, but parents pick up.
Sometimes
I've seen buses sitting after competitions to take them home.
We've tried to, wherever we can, move away from that because there's additional cost for having the buses sit. But sometimes, particularly with a particular sport, it may be difficult, given the nature of the equipment, to not transport the kids back, because some sports are more equipment intensive than others.
Yeah, number one is I think everything should be on the table. And, whether it be transportation, administrative cuts, efficiencies with staffing in other areas, everything needs to be on the table. That being said, I've heard people say the community hasn't felt the heat or they haven't felt that, but I truly believe the community hasn't really been asked what they want. And, many months ago when we first failed, I said we needed to have a task force, we needed to have a committee, we needed to figure out what the community want, get ideas from the community on how to go about doing this, and we still haven't done that, you know. I still think that the community needs to be asked. I think that if we go out and ask our community for a reasonable tax amount at a future time, which we will be required to because the budget we have is not sustainable under any circumstances, that the community will support us. The community loves this school, they love this district, they're very passionate about it. You know, we could discuss all the other issues as to why it did or did not, you know, did not pass, but, you know, those are all other things that we need to talk about. But, I mean, here and now, I'm going to say the same thing I said at the last meeting. We have growth through CPI, which is due to our increased revenue, increased assessments, and we have new construction. It's a reassessment year. So we're going to get between $2 and $4 million of additional revenue. I think that we need to have a commitment to our staff to tell them that they're going to have jobs next year. I think that we need to use those funds to implement the things that administration has said we have to have or that we need. And if it's $1 million more and we end up having $1 million, I think that our additional revenues that we're going to receive may cover a portion of that. So I think that even staffing proposal 1 may not result in a $2.5 or $2.6 million deficit. It may be significantly less than that based on past history. Now, I understand that we've made significant changes to our budgeting process, of which some of those excesses are no longer there, but with reassessment and everything, I think a lot of those things will go by the wayside. I feel that a lot of the things that we're talking about up here are good suggestions. I am very concerned about suggestions made that, well, if we didn't have it yesterday, we don't need it today. You know, when I went to school, we didn't have computers. So do we want to get rid of all the computers? I mean, that's totally absurd, but it's almost as absurd of being recognized as a leader in state or a leader in the national school district and not offer Mandarin Chinese. I mean, some of these things that we're offering, some of these positions that we've put in place are there for a reason, and that's why we got to the point that we are. It's easy to say we didn't have it yesterday, so we don't need it today. Well, maybe we needed it 5 years ago. I don't have all the answers. I'm afraid that what we're going to do here is, you know, we're on an island and we just found out that there's a fire on the other side of the island, and we're going to start chucking stuff in a boat and make decisions to get the heck off of here. When if we knew that the timber was getting dry and we had time to plan it out, we could make these decisions. I'm going to say exactly what I said the last meeting. We don't make any major cuts for next year. We ride it out. We'll still be above. I would make my recommendation would be don't go below the 16% minimum. And we ride it out. We take the time to thoroughly research these cuts, inefficiencies in programs, in Google, and all these, you know, transportation. Everything should be on the table. I think that we take the time to research these things, and we're sitting down here next year at this time with a committee's recommendation, with a community's recommendation, and it's not just a decision made by 12 people. I think that that's something that we need to do. I think the community needs to be involved. I think that's a big reason that we didn't pass our previous 2 levies, because the community was not intimately involved. And I think that's a mistake that we made, and that's a mistake that we can correct, and we can move forward. And we can pass a tax levy, and we will have to pass a tax levy. But it's going to have to come from the community, and we're going to have to get that community involvement, which we haven't done to this point. So my recommendation is going to be we move forward. If it's a, you know, at what administrations is saying it could be a $2.6 million deficit, that we will still be above our 16% with that $2.6 million. I say we do that, and it gives us a year to make good decisions instead of throwing things in a boat to get off the island and realize we left something behind, or we cut something that we really didn't want to cut, or that some of the decisions we made are going to have an impact or unintended consequences that we aren't taking the time to thoroughly think over. And I think we owe that to our employees to say, okay, you guys are going to have a job next year, and let's move on.
I agree with a lot of what you say. However, I don't want to be sitting here next year having this conversation, and I don't know that the morale of our staff can handle us having to have these types of conversations every year. We have to be stable, and I think part of how we got here was we're going to have extra money in the future. The community will give us extra money. So yeah, let's pay for these things. Let's add these positions or whatever it was, with the hope that that money's going to come. I'm concerned that what we're doing now, as Mark says, kicking the can, but we're doing that exact same thing. And that's what the community said each time. Look, you didn't, you're not showing us what we want to see. You're not showing us fiscal responsibility. They're not seeing it. I think we're starting to do a much better job at communicating with the community. However, my concern is if we leave status quo, and I'm not specifically saying staffing, because the one thing that I want to ensure is that our staff feels secure and that they have job security, because job insecurity is going to impact them at home. It's going to impact them in the classroom and everywhere else. So it's going to be detrimental to our whole community if every year around this time the teachers start having to worry. So that's my concern. Is we get another year from now, we're having the same conversation. We say, yes, let's go for another tax levy, and the community says no. And we haven't right-sized to a degree for the money we have today. We know we don't have enough money to keep what we have today. So if that's the case, then, so that's my only concern, is that by saying, yeah, we're going to get more money, they'll give us money in April of 18 or November of 18 or whatever it is. What if they say no? We don't have options then at that point. Right now we have options to take the district and make it a lean, mean financial, machine per se. Not that we haven't done that, but the resources are less now. The needs are different for the students. Technology. I mean, since 2000, we've looked at administrator. The world has really changed in the last 10 years. So, I respect everything that you're saying, and I'm very fearful, and I think that, when I ran for the school board, it was to be fiscally responsible. And to rely on money that you don't have, that you might get in a couple years, is not being fiscally responsible. It will not create any stability for the staff. And that's really and when I say staff, I'm talking, the people that are every single day working with our kids. So that's kind of my concern, is that I don't want to say kicking the can, but we're not being responsible if we don't look at what if we don't get more money.
I think it was clear. I don't think I need to go out and engage the community right now. It's clear to me what they said. I mean, they've spoken. It has nothing to do with anybody sitting here at this table. We had town hall meetings. We had 20 people show up. We had Pals Breakfast, numerous Pals Breakfast, trying to engage some of our older community members that don't have stakeholders or kids in the school district. We went to PTO meetings. We went to Girl Scout meetings. We went to Chamber of Commerce meetings. We did engage them. We did talk to them. We did tell them the needs. They understand the needs. They said no. I don't think I need to go out and communicate with the public right now. I think the message is very clear, and they've given us a clear direction. I'm not really sure how to get people out to come and talk about this, because we can't get them. We told them we're going to raise their taxes, or at least attempt to, and ask for their support, and we couldn't even come out, get folks to come out. But the minute you mentioned that they're going to get 300 students from Normandy, 3,000 people showed up in a gymnasium. That's when you need to talk to the folks. So, you know, to me, it's like, okay, you know, it's they have taken an approach right now where we're at today is we've been given revenues that have been afforded to us to balance the budget and address the needs in our school district. The message is clear. How much clearer can it be? I know we closed the gap a little bit on the election, but we're not about to pass a school tax levy right now. We did ask for $14 million. We're talking about $2 million in cuts right now. I know we lost a bunch of stuff. We want to add some stuff back, but we don't have a sustainable school district. I don't think I need to go out and engage the public right now. They've spoken. They said no. I think it's our job as members of this community who've been elected by the community is to address what they said, and that is to live within your means, and that's where we're at today. So, you know, I'm not sure what island you're living on, Mr. Hain, and I don't mean any disrespect, but you mentioned 3 or 4 things that I said, and you went completely opposite. I'm listening to the taxpayer, clearly, and it's important to me as a elected official to make decisions based on what they said. And I don't think there's any engagement necessary at this point. I think we need to work within the budget that we've been afforded and start looking at possible ways to increase our revenues outside of asking the taxpayers, or reduce expenditures and make our school district more efficient. That's what we have to work with right now.
I was just going to ask, Mr. Sommer, you've been awfully quiet, not to put you on the spot, but you're a CPA by trade. I'd like to hear what you have to say about the future of our finances.
Yes, I am. Well, wasn't the last meeting you put me on the spot?
Don't be so quiet.
That's my nature. I observe. So, I think some of the notes I wrote down is over the past, we'll say 6 months, I think the increased communications we've had with our patrons, with our parents, with our students has helped, and that helped close the gap, as Mr. LaFata said. But since the election, I haven't seen that same strong effort. So I would encourage us to do that if we are serious about some type of additional tax levy question in the future. And there are still folks, and I was approached after the election, and individuals told me that they voted no because they still weren't approached by the district. So I know we're doing everything we can to have them come to us, whether it be the town hall meetings. So I think maybe now it's the point where somewhere along the line we're going to have to start going to them, whether it's attending, going to a meeting at a senior center, whatever the case may be. But I think we're going to have to start going to them rather than them asking or coming to us. But really, as a district, we're very fortunate. We do have a $180 million budget for this year that we're in. And there are a lot of school districts that would love to be in our position. There's no doubt about it. And my concern is that I don't think we need to make any hasty decisions today. The sky is not falling today. Is it going to fall in the future? Possibly. But what I've noticed with my time on the board is rather than making hasty cuts, whether it's for the current year or the next year, we are very good at establishing efficiencies in lieu of major cuts. And I think that's the road we need to go down. And as many folks around the table have said, can we continue to be as successful as we have been without any future revenue source? I don't think any one of us can say that we have to have something in the future. But I think I'd rather see us try to be more efficient in the meantime rather than making major cuts. And the talk was about cutting transportation. I would be more of the approach of what efficiencies can we implement and still provide transportation to our students. So that's kind of the road I've been down as my time on the board these past 10 years. And I think that's the road I'd like to continue to see us go down. Now, that may change if we're still in the same position 3 or 4 years down the road where there really aren't any more efficiencies to make. If we've already made the cuts at that point, what do we do then? You know, so that's kind of where I am and where I'd like to see us go. And thank you for putting me on the spot again.
So I think that unless anybody else has anything else to offer, that might conclude our work session. Unless there's any other further discussion.
Can I try to summarize? So it sounds like the board, we have some consensus moving forward. We will bring you a status quo staffing plan for another work session with much more detail in it, as we always do next time. And it sounds like you would like for us to launch a study of transportation and different levels of service that we might have some reduction in services, gains in efficiencies that would result in a reduction in the transportation budget. Those are the two big ideas from work session right now.
So which recommendation closely aligns with, are we thinking option 3 at this point? Option 2 or option 1? Because I'm hearing mixed things on the. Right. I think some people are thinking option 1, some are thinking option 2, and others are thinking option 3. So I don't really want to take a vote right now, but if we're looking at options here, when we say status quo staffing, how does that affect each option?
Option 1 would allow to add additional staff. It would not be status quo staffing. Option 2, we could do status quo staffing, make those non-staffing cuts in that chart, and do our add backs. There would be a slight deficit, which would likely result in a balanced budget. And we could continue to search for additional things in addition to that chart based on some of our conversations tonight, which might decrease that small budget deficit at budget time, which could be closer to option 3, or maybe it's a 2B option, somewhere between option 2 and 3.
So it sounds like it's a work in progress to get to option 3, but option 2 is doable, and we could get somewhere between option 2 and 3 with efficiencies.
Yes, yes. I think that the organization's been working very hard to be efficient. And so I think I know what you mean by efficient being continue to look for reductions, consolidations, decreases in services that won't have a large effect. But I think we have to be very careful when we talk about we're going to increase being efficient, because I think that has a negative connotation that implies we haven't been an efficient organization. Yes, we can look at decreasing some services, making some reductions in places that might impact students the least, and look for some of those things that you all have discussed. Those things are going to have an effect on our system, but maybe the least amount effect on our system. So things like studying transportation, how might we reduce services and consolidate some routes, things along those lines. Some of the other things that were mentioned tonight, what are some things we could live without that we're not getting as much bang for our buck as we did at one time. So yes, we could work with an understanding of 2 and attempt to get closer to 3. That could be something that we could do.
If I could follow up on that. And just to clarify, when I talked about establishing efficiencies, I guess I was looking at there are options available to us today that may not have been available to us 2 or 3 years ago. A great example might be lease versus purchase on technology. So that does not in no way mean that we are not being efficient today. So I want to clarify that point. But to follow up on the 3 options that are presented to us, option 1 talks about a $2.6 million additional deficit. And I think it would be irresponsible for any of us as a board member to increase the deficit at where we sit today. When you look at option 3 that talks about having a balanced budget and increasing the fund balance that's available, I think personally, that ship has sailed, and without additional revenues, that would not be an option that would even be obtainable without doing some major drastic cuts to truly hurt the children in the classroom. So I think option 2, which is also the recommendation of the administration, is our best option at this point based upon what we know and the staffing plan that's been presented to us this evening.
Ms. Cope?
So I agree with Mr. Summer. I'm interested in option 2 because I'm not interested, as I mentioned, in cutting our staffing anymore and making sure, as Mrs. Walker said, that our staff is comfortable, that they have a job. I think that's important for anyone's family life as well as work life. We talked about looking for cost savings opportunities in transportation, which I mentioned is very important to me. The other thing I would like us to consider was brought up in the survey. I read all the responses as well, is taking a look at the usage of some of our software licensing. So I think we also need a study on, we have put some software products out there for people to use, whether it's our students or our staff. Is it being used, and is it truly a benefit? So sometimes we buy into an opportunity, and due to culture or habit or whatever that may be, we're not using that opportunity. So I would like to see if there's any cost savings available there as well.
And I know Michelle has mentioned that several times. Mr. Wilson has a plan to develop that. We think we need to bring some people together. The list of software that we use in our district is extensive. The usage reports aren't necessarily press a button and get a usage report. We'd like to, Matt's favorite word, survey. We are probably going to have to look at surveying our staff in some instances to determine which of the software programs they use. I think we could have that done by budget time to know when we bring the budget back to you which of those software programs we would look to renew subscriptions and which we might have to look elsewhere.
And ask our students.
Yes, students as well.
So I'm assuming if option 2, sounds like that's the direction of the board, option 2 would be a balanced budget, correct?
Not on paper when it's brought to you for approval in June, but by the end of the year, yes.
So the board is
I understand that, but, you know, a balanced budget in presentation is a balanced budget to our public. A deficit projected balance is a deficit to our public. So I understand that there is, you know, some things that could take place, but the presentation to me is important. If we continue to spend money and show the public that we're presenting a deficit budget to them, then we're sending a mixed message that the community sent a very firm message to us. And that's my only concern is if we approve a deficit budget, then we're saying, okay, we're going to continue to deficit spend despite our financial difficulties. I have an issue with that.
I'm not an accountant, but would it be as simple as changing the revenues? Not changing them, but estimating the revenues closer to what we believe them that they would be, so that we're not showing such a big deficit. I don't want to end up with a balanced budget and then a $3 million excess at the end of the year either.
after having made some cuts, absolutely.
Right.
And I think how we show that in the budget document is our challenge. And so we've had some conversations about how we might demonstrate that it is likely to be a balanced budget in the end, for the reason that Mr. Lafata mentioned. So could we take into account the historical positive variance within the budget in that document to demonstrate that in the end it would likely be a balanced budget? That would be something we think we could do.
And I think you have to realize, as you
Like
look at
when
this
Kevin
budget
shakes his
that's
head.
presented by Mr. Supple every year, it is a living document, but it's also, in my mind, the worst-case scenario. So I would hate to have a balanced budget presented to us and then all of a sudden at the end of the year have a $4 million surplus to surprise us. So, but once again, the building administrators and administration here And the staff is very good about making sure and trying to be as efficient as they can with the taxpayers' dollars, and we appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons why we always do have a variance between the budget that's approved in June and where we end up 12 months from then. So
We understand the perception of bringing a budget that is not a planned balanced budget. And to Mr. Summers' point, there is a variance in any budget that you look at, and it's either going to be positive or it's going to be negative. It very rarely, if you look at a school district budget, it is at exactly 0% variance. Most variances, if you look at budgets in our comparable district, are much larger than ours. And lately they have been more on the positive side. So I think we can start to take the historical variance into consideration when we're planning our document. But just as you said, you don't want to plan for a balance or a deficit budget and come in with a surplus. We don't want to plan with a balance and come in with a deficit, because that will put us in an even more difficult. So if we bring to you worst case scenario, knowing that it will very unlikely be that scenario, that would kind of be our preference moving forward. But again, we think we can make that, we could reflect that in the budget document when you all are voting.
I personally would like to see zeros. I really would. I mean, I'm a banker, and if my customer brings in a projection and it's a loss for the upcoming year in their pro forma, well, I'm going to look at them a little sideways. Now, we don't have to make a profit here. I'm not looking to make a profit, but the appearance of a balanced budget to the public, in my opinion, is very important going forward. And not a deficit budget, a balanced budget that's presented to the public and say, here, the school district is tightening their belts, they're balanced their budget, they're not continuing to deficit spend. That is important. Whether it's said 16 different ways, to me, it's important.
I heard Kevin say he could make it.
Yeah. And I guess, and what I said before is past performance is no indication of, future results, but the $2.6 million projected deficit on option one, we have overcome that amount every year. So I look at option one as basically it's a balanced budget. I understand the perception issues, and, me and Mr. LaFata can agree to disagree on the results of the vote. I mean, I took the vote to say that the public said that they did not believe that they didn't want to approve a 60-cent operating levy for the Francis House School District. Maybe I misread the ballot language, but I didn't see anything in there about a balanced budget. I didn't see anything in there about cutting things that are going to directly impact kids. That's the high school extracurriculars for $250,000 on a $180 million budget. Come on, folks, we can do better than that for our kids. There's no reason to cut that in the overall scope of the budget. They told us no, they wouldn't approve 60 cents. We can agree to disagree whether or not we have the community, but everything that we did, that we said that we did, the town hall meetings, all these other things, these were all done after the fact. What I'm saying is we need to talk to the community. We need to have the community involved in the decisions that we're making, instead of us sitting up here and having 7 people or 12 people make the decision that we're going to go out and ask for a 60-cent levy, or we're going to go out and ask for a 48-cent levy, without asking the community first. That's what I'm trying to get across to my fellow board members, the administration, and people in office. We need to talk to the community. We've gone out twice and failed. And we're not going to do anything different. It's very frustrating to me that I guess we know better.
So we're at, we sound like we're somewhere between option 2 and 3. I don't think a vote is necessary at this time. I think it's, do you want to vote? Because in my opinion, I think we have the confidence in our staff to come back with, and we can actually table that item.
I think if we table it, we have to bring it back in the near future, and I'm not sure we want to do that either. Laura, Robert's Rules, Queen of the World?
You don't have to take it from the table.
Okay, so if we just.
Okay.
It could sit on the table forever.
Okay.
All right, you can put it on the table then.
Yeah, we can, if we don't act on it, then you don't have to vote on it, so it's, if we're not, no motion's made, so we move on, so. I think you've got enough direction, from the board to, for us to have a staffing plan approved at next meeting, and that is what date? December 15th, okay. Find my agenda.
So just to clarify for me one more time, Mark, sorry. So what we're, consensus of option 2 to 3 includes the lists of reductions at the top without any staffing cuts. And we think that will be sustainable at least through this coming school year. And are we projecting staffing cuts for the future, the next year? Because what I'd like to see is our staff be able to go, whew, now we don't have to worry about this for a year or 2.
I think that's where we, the majority landed tonight, or the direction that the board's given, so it's somewhere between option 2 and 3, and you come back with that, and it's more option 2 than anything is what I heard, so. I'm struggling to find the agenda here. Was there superintendent comments on here?
Nope, no superintendent comments, Mr. Ruff.
Okay.
That's why I brought it up.
All right. So there's a December 15th meeting. Is there anything to add or subtract from that meeting? Okay. Board, is there anything on December 15th meeting that we need to talk about or add or subtract from the agenda? We have 2 meetings in January, or 1?
Glad you mentioned that because we need to talk about that.
Okay.
Go ahead, like I remember what it is. So December, we have a regular board meeting, and in January, the first meeting of the month, we are going to have the search firm meeting. Is that correct, Laura?
Okay.
Going to have a search firm meeting.
We were holding January 5th for opening negotiations and having IBB training.
That's on a Friday, right?
That's on Thursday,
Thursday.
January 5th.
Okay.
Laura, did we have scheduled the search firm meeting? I thought
And-
we did that last meeting.
And I think we were looking at a new date for that.
Okay, so we'll be getting back with you about that search firm meeting because we need to have that, get that scheduled.
And we were also holding Friday, January 6th as a potential date to continue negotiations with FHEA, starting them the night of the 5th and then carrying over to the 6th was what we put on hold.
And the meeting in second meeting in January is what date? 19th, okay. That would be my birthday. And I will not be here. Actually, I'll be in Washington, D.C., so I'm out that week. So Ms. Cope has gladly accepted the opportunity to run the meeting. Yes. So, with that being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Walker, second by Mr. Summer.
Ms. Cope?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.